Guys, boxing gossip in the house, and I'm here to discuss the major fight of this weekend. Huck versus Mairis Briedis. Now, had the news recently that Tony Bellew is to be made WBC champion emeritus in the cruiserweight division, similar to what they did with Vitaly Klitschko when he retired from the sport. It's clearly something they do when they've got a champion who they want to keep on the scenes. But they're concerned about their level of activity and concerned about when the next fight in that respective division is going to be. So, as I understand it, Tony Bellew can elect at any point to cash in this position and fight the reigning WBC champion for the belt. Similarly, Vitaly Klitschko could maybe come back to the sport now and say he wanted to fight with Deontay Wilder, although perhaps that's even more unlikely. But anyway, with that decision having been made, my understanding is that rather than this being for the interim title, this is actually going to be for the WBC Cruiserweight title. And to be fair, it's a fight worthy of a World Championship. In my opinion, if you were talking the top 5 in the division, you could probably put both of these guys in there. And let's talk about them. We're going to start by talking about Mairis Briedis, but let's give you the records first. So Briedis comes to the ring, 6'1" cruiserweight, 32 years old, 21-0, with 18 of those 21 wins coming by way of KO. Huck, 40 wins, 3 losses, 1 draw. He's been stopped twice, and of his 40 wins, 27 of them come by KO. And it's an interesting fight, this. 2 big names, 2 big punchers, 2 guys. Huck's known as quite a durable guy. Briedis hasn't been stopped before in his career. Both of them have fought heavyweight competition. Huck famously went the distance with Alexander Povetkin back in 2012. Mairis Briedis actually knocked out Manuel Char, former Vitaly Klitschko victim, if I recall correctly, in 2015 within the heavyweight division. So 2 big punches, and it's a very, very tasty fight, this. And I understand, I should just confirm, having looked at the box rec, it is for both the WBC Cruiserweight title and also the IBO Cruiserweight title. So 2 belts on the line, but the WBC is going to be the main motivator for both of these guys, without any doubt. But let's start by talking about Briedis, because Briedis is a guy who is very, very, very well regarded by the boxing hardcore. You know, this is a guy who is viewed as a future world champion. This is a guy who's been viewed as an elite boxer. Now, I'm going to start by a little disclaimer by saying I haven't been following Mairis Briedis since the amateurs. You know, Briedis, I have seen him fight. I've seen him fight Duradola. I've seen him fight Manuel Char. I've seen him fight Simon Vallily. So I've seen him fight 3 times. And I have watched other highlights, clips and that sort of thing. So I have checked the guy out, don't get me wrong. But he's not someone I've seen every fight of. Huck, someone I know better. Presumably most will be in the same boat given given the longevity that Huck has had at the top of the cruiserweight division. But Briedis is a guy who, if I'm honest, I am slightly unconvinced by. And that's not to say that I've actually got reasons to believe he's not a good fighter. And that's not to say I've actively got reasons to believe that he won't make it as a world champion. It's just to say that from watching his fights today, he hasn't completely convinced me. The Simon Vallily fight was a classic example of that. He knocked Vallily out early. You know, Briedis is very, very heavy-handed. You won't see me say anything different over the course of this video. Briedis is very heavy-handed. Look at the knockout ratio, 18 knockouts and 21 wins. He's knocked out, guys like Manuel Char, who's a heavyweight. You know, Briedis can clearly hit. But I was slightly concerned about some of the success that Simon Vallily was enjoying in that fight before the stoppage. You know, that was an intriguing fight, but let's have it right. Vallily was a 9-fight novice going into that matchup, and I thought Vallily was having real success boxing Mairis Briedis from the outside, and I thought Briedis is the kind of fighter who'd be very, very vulnerable to going up against an elite boxer who could use distance and jab and range. Yeah, I know Briedis has fought up at heavyweight against Manuel Char, but to me, Briedis doesn't look to be the biggest cruiserweight. I fought against Vallily, and I also fought against Duradola. He actually looked like the smaller man in there. He's listed on BoxRec as 6'1", but I think he's relatively small in stature, and I don't think he's got, the biggest physique. I imagine Marco Huck will have a noticeable size difference. But for me, with Briedis, I was just a little bit concerned about his boxing. For me, he's not a guy who really likes to box on the outside. He has a jab, but I don't think he really likes to fight behind it. He's also not really, as I see it, this kind of elite inside chess player. I more view Briedis as a kind of a mid-range type guy. I think of Briedis as the kind of guy who wants to stand within the realms of the pocket. I don't think he wants to fight in a phone booth though. I think he kind of wants to stand in that 3/4 to mid-range, and I think he wants to trade power punches. I view him as I don't want to steal Dwyer's catchphrase, but could he be described as a mid-range hooker? Maybe I need to see more of him, but I think potentially. Briedis, for me, is a guy who I would pick to lose to an elite outside boxer such as Alexander Usyk. I think Usyk's movement, Usyk's distance, Usyk's jab would probably be the key to beating Mairis Briedis. I think he's vulnerable from the outside, and I also think his level of opposition is it's not bad, but it's not elite. You know, if we look at his last opponents, Valili, Duradola, and then various other names, it's not a terrible resume, but what I'm just saying is I'm not entirely convinced. I'm not entirely convinced that he's fought anything more than fringe contenders, and I'm not entirely convinced that he's got elite boxing and elite defence. I more think that this is a guy who, brings a lot of power, brings a lot of pressure, and has proved superior to the level of opposition he's been in with. But I question when he gets to fights against top 5 opponents and his power isn't purely enough. I question what other strings there are to his bow, because I'm not 100% sure he's going to be outboxing elite heavyweights. And in fact, elite cruiserweights. In fact, against elite cruiserweights, I suspect that certain defensive frailties that I've thought may exist in his game could potentially be exacerbated. He's kind of a guy who, without a lot of size and without a lot of defence, likes to be a pressure fighter. He likes to throw the jab, but he likes to throw the jab largely to get himself inside that 3/4 range. And then what he really looks to do is, looks to catch your punches and counter with them. And he's got very, very good timing. He throws a lot of these sort of awkward overhand punches. You see a lot of times where he'll come in kind of low and then he'll throw something over the top from an awkward angle, and he'll catch someone unsuspecting. And when he does that, he certainly carries substantial power, and he can change the course of a fight. But that's all against the level of opposition that he's been in with today. And you just wonder, a guy like Marco Huck, I know Huck's getting on a bit. I think Huck's actually only the same age as Briedis. I think Huck's only 32. In fact, he is only 32. They're the same age, but Huck's certainly got a lot more miles on the clock than Briedis. But one thing Huck is for me is durable. I know there was the Glowacki fight, etc., but Marco Huck, he went the distance with Povetkin. We've seen him go the distance time and time again in wars. Hockey's not a guy who's necessarily going to collapse the first time he's clipped in this fight. So I just wonder with Briedis, people rate him very, very, very highly, and he's dispatching opponents, and he's dispatching decent opponents in good fashion. But still, another one of Dwyer's catchphrases for the second time in this video: do knockouts cause amnesia? And all of these knockouts and all of these stoppages maybe making people overlook the fact that this is a guy who perhaps doesn't have the most solid boxing fundamentals, that this is a guy who actually eats a lot of shots from range, that this is a guy who doesn't really have an elite jab or elite lateral movement and that sort of thing. That's an open question in my mind, and I'm not necessarily someone who thinks Briedis is going to be a failure. It's just that at the minute I'm not also convinced that he's going to be elite. I'm not looking at tapes of him and I'm not seeing this dominant star that a lot of other people seem to be thinking of Briedis as. People think Briedis is a really, really, really elite top class boxer, and I'm yet to see that. But here against Marco Huck is certainly his chance to convince many people, including myself, and to really establish himself in that sort of elite level. As for Marco Huck, the key question for me in this fight is Marco Huck approaching the end of his career? As I've already alluded to in this video, he's 32 years old, so he's not over the hill in terms of his age, but he's already had 44 fights, and we know the way Marco Huck fights. He's a warrior. He gets involved in brawls. There's a lot of scrapping. He takes a lot of leather himself, and those 44 fights are likely to have taken their toll on Marco Huck in one form or another. We know he lost to Krzysztof Glowacki in a very, very tough fight in 2015. Since then, he's come back. He had a win over Ola Afolabi, and he had a win over Enzo Maccarinelli conqueror Dmitry Kucha. But I'm slightly unconvinced that the Marco Huck we see in the ring now is the same guy who, we were maybe seeing in the ring 2010 to 2012 when he was fighting guys like Denis Lebedev, Alexander Povetkin, Ola Afolabi in their first and second fights. I just wonder whether he slightly lost the step. I actually think this fight makes for a great stylistic contest. I think this has the potential to be a real good fight and a real war, because these are both guys who put their head down, come forward, and throw a huge amounts of shots, and they're not necessarily overly concerned about doing a Floyd Mayweather and putting a shoulder roll up and trying to slip punches. These are two guys who have shown at times they'll take one to give one, and I suspect that will be the case here. But has Marco Huck lost a step? Because I think this is a fight where both guys are going to have to get involved in a real war and go to the trenches. I don't suspect this is a fight that ends in 1 or 2 rounds. I think this goes late. I think both guys have to throw bombs and eat leather. And that's why I think this is a very, very difficult fight to call. Because I actually think Marco Huck, whilst he isn't the sort of elite outside boxer that I'd necessarily pick to beat Mairis Briedis, I think that Marco Huck actually represents a real step up in competition. And I think some of the deficiencies defensively Briedis has shown are definitely a cause for concern going up against a guy like Marco Huck, who's a proven top class cruiserweight and proven world championship level fighter. It's a real 50-50 this matchup. And I'm very tentatively, and this is very, very tentative, this is a 51-49 kind of pick for my money. I'm very, very tentatively going to pick Marco Huck in this fight, actually, because I just am slightly concerned about some of the holes that I perceive maybe in Briedis' game, even at the kind of fringe contender Simon Vallily level that he's been in with recently. Marco Huck is a guy who we know what he is. We know he's got his strengths. We know he's got his weaknesses. He's not a pound for pound number 1 fighter, but he's got a chin, he's got power, and he's got a hell of a lot of aggression. And I'm not sure that Mairis Briedis is going to hit Marco Huck, and Marco Huck is going to fail like the guys Briedis has hit in his career to date. And when Marco Huck hits Briedis, I'm not sure that Briedis has yet been in with a test of that nature. Now, don't get me wrong, Briedis could easily stand up to Marco Huck's punches nicely and could easily prove to be the fresher, stronger, younger man. I'm not saying that this is a confident pick. But at the moment, having to pick between the two in a very, very close fight, I'm inclined to pick Marco Huck and edge it to him by the narrowest of whiskers. I think from a betting perspective, there are some angles here that you could potentially consider. And I'm just going to pull up the odds on my phone here. Just bear with me for 1 second. So this is according to Oddschecker. They've actually got Marco Huck as an outsider in this fight. Marco Huck is available as big as 7-4. That's available with William Hill. And Mairis Briedis is long odds on. William Hill have him as short as 4-9. Your other bookies, you can still get a bit of 1-2, a bit of 4-7 in places. But Mairis Briedis is actually a much bigger favourite there than I anticipated. I thought it would be more of an even fight in terms of the odds. So, yeah, I don't necessarily... The one bet that I did see earlier that I would definitely have a second look at, and this is purely a value play for me. This isn't a bet that I'm necessarily queuing up to place my mortgage on, but I think for a small stakes value play, there is actually some value in Marco Huck to win by knockout. And let me ask you this question: if you're watching this video and you don't actually know what those odds are yet, have a quick think in your mind, and actually try and leave a quick comment before I reveal what the price is. But what would your guess be as to what the odds on Marco Huck to win the fight by knockout is? Because with two bookmakers, Bet365 and William Hill, Marco Huck is available to win this fight by knockout at 6-1. And I just think that's an overvaluing. I know Huck's been the distance a few times lately, but he's still got a knockout percentage in the 60s. He's fighting a guy who I don't believe has had many 12-round fights, if any 12-round fights. He's probably been in fights that are scheduled to go later, but typically he's ended them early. And he's going up against a guy who's fought a lower level of opposition and you know, has shown some defensive frailties. I just think in this fight, at the minute, Mairis Briedis is the up-and-coming guy with reasons to think he could be the next big thing and reasons to suspect he won't make it to the elite. Whereas Marco Huck is the proven commodity. He's the established world-level operator. And you get fights like this. I mean, Gervonta Davis versus Pedraza was one where, you know, you may be inclined to side with the up-and-coming prospect because they just look that exceptional. But in this fight, whilst people are raving about Briedis, as I said earlier on in the video, I'm not entirely convinced. And whilst I think Marco Huck has maybe passed his peak, I don't think he's ready for retirement just yet. So I'm going to lean towards Marco Huck by the narrowest of margins. But I'm not surprised at all if Mairis Briedis wins the fight here. He is the favourite. He is undefeated. He's got the momentum. He's got a huge KO ratio. And Marco Huck is a guy you can catch and catch clean. He's not a defensive wizard. So not my most confident pick. But I'm going to edge to Mairis Briedis by a whisker. And I will be having a look at Marco Huck to win the fight by knockout, purely as a value play at 6-1. Let me know your thoughts on this fight, guys. How do you think it will break down? Is this a fight you see going the distance? Are you convinced by Briedis? Do you think Marco Huck is over the hill? Let me know your picks. Let me know your predictions in the comments section below. Do drop your thoughts. If you've enjoyed the video, please take the time to hit the thumbs up button to help me get more visibility on the channel. And I would always be grateful if new people or people who haven't done so before take the time to press subscribe. Many thanks indeed.